inside a courtroom that smelled of old papers and stress. I sat beside my little girl, holding her small hand, trying to stay calm. I thought the hearing would be simple, just another step in ending a painful marriage. Instead, my husband walked in with confidence, like he owned the truth. I didn't know that before the hour was over, he would lie about me, try to take my daughter, and push us both to the edge, until she stood up and changed everything. If you're watching this, please like the video, subscribe, and stay till the end. I walked into the courtroom expecting nothing more than another long morning of papers, questions, and slow arguments that never seemed to end. At my age, the cold benches, the bright lights, and the loud voices in those rooms already tired me before anything even began. I sat there believing today would be like all the other hearings I had been through during this divorce. I thought I would simply sit, listen, nod my head when the judge asked something, and pray the whole thing would end soon. But the moment my husband stood up, adjusted his coat, and opened his mouth, something inside me tightened. His voice sounded too smooth, too calm, like he had practiced his words in front of a mirror. I felt the hairs on my arms rise because I knew that tone. It was the same tone he used at home when he wanted to make me feel small, foolish, or scared. And I was right to feel it, because the lies that came out of his mouth were sharper than any knife. He spoke as if he was telling the judge some poor story about a troubled wife he had spent years trying to manage. He painted himself as a gentle husband who had suffered in silence. He claimed I was unstable, irresponsible, and too emotional to raise our daughter. He twisted our private life into a performance, shaping every truth into a lie that suited him. My heart pounded as I listened. My fingers dug into the wooden bench as he continued. I watched him pretend to wipe a tear that was never there. I watched his lawyer nod along as if he were listening to a saint speak. I sat still, but inside I felt heat rising in my chest, rising so fast that it was hard to breathe. I couldn't believe he was doing this, not after everything I had lived through with him. There I was, the woman who had cooked for him, supported him, stood beside him during his failures, and raised his child. Yet in that courtroom, he acted like I was a stranger who had ruined his perfect life. He lied with such ease that I wondered how long he had been waiting for this moment. I remembered all the nights he raised his voice, all the times he walked out for hours, all the silent meals where he stared at his phone instead of his family. And now he was here, pretending to be wounded and noble in front of the judge, hoping to take away the only person I truly cared about, my daughter. I looked over at my little girl sitting beside me. Her small hands were clenched in her lap. She looked scared but brave, like she was trying to understand why her father was talking about her mother as if she were dangerous. I felt sick thinking she had to hear this. No child should hear one parent lying about the other. No child should feel torn between love and truth. But he did not care about that. He kept going, lie after lie, building a wall around himself to make sure no one could see the real man behind the mask. I wanted to speak, to stand up and tell the judge everything he had done, everything I had endured. Every night I cried quietly so my daughter wouldn't hear, but the rules told me to stay silent until I was asked to speak, so I held it in. I sat there, feeling each lie like a blow to my chest. I felt old, tired, and powerless sitting in that wooden chair, watching the man I married turn into a stranger who wanted to ruin me. The room felt heavy, like the air was pressing against my skin. Even the judge looked unsure for a moment, as if wondering who to believe. My husband played his part well, hands folded, voice gentle, expressions timed with care. Meanwhile, I felt like I was on trial, not for what I had done, but for being the one who spoke less, cried less, and suffered quietly. He counted on that. He counted on the judge only hearing his loud words, not my quiet truth. I stared at the floor, my heart pounding, wondering how much more he would twist, how many more lies he would stack against me. I wondered if this was the day I would lose my daughter. My throat felt tight, my stomach churned, and my palms grew damp. But the worst part was not the lies themselves. It was the look in his eyes. cold, confident, certain that he would win, certain that he could rewrite our life story in front of strangers and walk away as the hero. I sat there thinking, this is it. This is how he takes everything from me. I felt helpless, and yet, deep inside, a small part of me refused to break. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if anyone would stand up for me. I only knew one thing. This moment, this hearing, this public betrayal would change everything, whether I won or lost. When my husband finished lying in court, he leaned back in his chair with a calmness that shook me to my core. I sat there watching him like I was seeing a stranger for the first time. I had lived with that man for years, cooked for him, raised a child beside him, kept his secrets, and stood by him through every failure he ever had. Yet in that courtroom, he acted as if I was someone he barely knew. The moment he stopped speaking, he looked at me, not with guilt or shame, but with a cold, slow smile that told me he believed he had already won. That smile felt heavier than any insult he had ever thrown at me at home. It was the kind of smile that said my voice did not matter, my pain did not matter, and the truth certainly did not matter. It was a smile of a man who thought the judge would believe him simply because he was confident enough to lie without blinking. His lawyer mirrored that same confidence. He kept his hands folded neatly, nodding along as if the lies were part of some business deal he had handled many times before. They had planned this. They had rehearsed this. I could see it in the way they exchanged quick looks, as if everything was unfolding exactly as they expected. I could feel my heartbeat loud in my ears. My body shook, not from fear of losing, but from the shock that a man I once built a family with could sit in front of a judge and strip me of my dignity without a second thought. Every word he said was designed to destroy me piece by piece. He made himself look like the gentle parent, the hard-working father, the patient husband. He painted me as unstable, irresponsible, and unfit. He twisted small arguments into huge stories. He took moments from our life and bent them into ugly shapes that suited his image. What hurt the most was not the lies themselves, but how easily they came out of his mouth. He lied with the same voice he once used to tell me he loved me. He lied with the same steady tone he once used when comforting our daughter. I realized then how much of our life together I may have misunderstood. I wondered how long he had been planning this, how long he had pretended to care while quietly shaping a story that would one day help him cut us out of his life. His mother, sitting behind him, looked proud. She watched me with narrowed eyes, like she had finally gotten what she wanted. She had never liked me. She had never treated me as part of their family. She always acted as if I had ruined her son's life instead of building a home with him. As her son's lies poured out in court, she nodded ever so slightly, as if she approved of every sentence. She had always stood behind him, even when he was wrong, and this time was no different. She sat straight, shoulders high, almost daring me to react, almost daring me to break down so she could feel justified in her hatred. But I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I stayed still, because I knew one thing. The truth was not on his side. He thought confidence was stronger than truth. He thought lies would cover the years he had mistreated me. He thought the judge would not look deeper, but what he did not understand was that children see everything. Children hear everything. Children carry memories even when adults try to bury them. And my daughter, sitting beside me with her small hands clenched in her lap, had witnessed more than he ever imagined. As I watched my husband and his lawyer, I felt a mix of sadness and disgust. Sadness for the man he had become. Disgust for the man he may have always been. I remembered the nights he came home angry, slamming doors, yelling over nothing, blaming me for problems he never wanted to fix. I remembered the mornings he ignored us, the dinners he ruined with cruel remarks, the birthdays he forgot, the promises he broke. For years I had told myself he was stressed, tired, overwhelmed, but watching him in that courtroom, comfortable lying about us, made me realize he never respected me at all. He only respected control. He only valued power. And in that courtroom, he thought he had all of it. That smile he gave me kept replaying in my mind as if it was carved into my memory. He believed he had already taken what mattered most, my daughter. He believed the judge would believe him because people like him always assume the world is on their side. But what he didn't expect was that the smallest person in the room held the biggest truth. He didn't expect that the child he had ignored, frightened, and dismissed would be the very person to destroy his lies. And as I sat there, holding my breath, watching him relax in his chair like a man who had just secured his victory, something in me shifted. I was no longer afraid. I was no longer confused. I was no longer trying to understand him. From that moment on, I simply waited for the truth to find its way into the room, because I knew it was coming, and when it arrived, his smile would die faster than his lies. My daughter was only 7 years old when everything began shifting inside our home, and even though she was young, she understood far more than anyone believed. Children see more than adults think, and she had grown up watching the way her father treated me. She had watched every argument from the hallway, every slammed door, every moment I wiped my face before walking back into the room pretending nothing was wrong. When her father raised his voice, her small shoulders would tense. When he threw things, she would close her eyes like she already expected the sound. I used to tell myself children forget, that they don't hold on to moments the way adults do, but she remembered everything, every word he said, every moment he made me feel small, every time I hid the bruises he left in places I hoped she wouldn't see. She had a front row seat to the pain I carried, and I didn't even realize it until much later. She was the one who heard us when we argued late at night, lying in her bed while the house shook with anger. She was the one who saw me sit in the kitchen some mornings with swollen eyes after a night of silence and cold treatment. She watched me try to make peace, try to keep the family together, try to pretend nothing was wrong because I thought a broken truth was safer for her than a broken home. I carried guilt every single day, telling myself that if I stayed quiet, if I kept the peace, if I pretended her father wasn't slowly tearing me apart, she would grow up in a stable house. But stability built on fear is not stability at all. She saw her father's temper. She saw the disrespect. She saw the way he made decisions without me, the way he dismissed me when I tried to speak, the way he acted like we were burdens instead of family. And even though she was small, she understood who was hurting the home and who was holding it together. But she never told me she knew. She kept everything inside because she thought speaking up would only make things worse. There were moments when I caught her staring at me with a sad expression too mature for her age. Once, she placed her tiny hand on my cheek after an argument, and even though she didn't say a word, her eyes said everything. She wished she could help me. She wished she could stop him. She wished I wasn't trying so hard to protect her from something she already understood. That was the part that broke my heart the most. I was trying to shield her from pain she was already living through. And because she was young and quiet and gentle, her father assumed she wasn't paying attention. He assumed she saw him as the fun parent, the one who brought gifts after each argument, the one who pretended everything was fine in front of friends and neighbors. But she wasn't fooled. She watched how he changed when nobody else was around. She watched how he controlled everything, the money, the decisions, the daily routines. She watched how he blamed me for anything that went wrong, even things that weren't my fault. And she learned early what emotional abuse looked like. There were nights she crawled into my bed because she said she had a nightmare, but I knew the nightmare wasn't in her dreams. It was in the next room. I used to lie awake beside her, feeling her small heartbeat against my arm, and wonder if she would grow up thinking this was what love looked like. That was my greatest fear, that she would learn to accept the same kind of treatment from men because she had seen me accept it. I didn't want her to inherit my silence. I didn't want her to repeat my mistakes. I didn't want her to believe that being strong meant swallowing pain until it drowned you. But back then, I felt trapped. I felt scared. I felt too tired to leave and too ashamed to tell anyone what was happening behind our doors. Still, through all of it, she never turned against me. She never believed his lies when he told her I was the one ruining the family. She never accepted his excuses when he tried to justify his behavior. She stayed close to me, She watched, she learned, and somewhere inside her small body, courage began to grow, quiet, steady, and patient. She carried everything she saw like a secret weight, waiting for the day she would be strong enough to speak. She understood more than any child should understand. She saw more than she should have ever seen. And on the day of the hearing, the day her father tried to turn the entire world against me, she finally decided she wouldn't let him twist the truth anymore. She had lived through the storms. She had watched me keep the home standing. She had watched him tear it down. And when the moment came, she did what I never expected a child to do. She chose to speak for both of us because she knew I had spent too long being silent. For years before that courtroom day, the cracks in my marriage had been growing slowly, one small incident at a time, until they formed a wall between us that I could no longer ignore. I often think back to those years and wonder how I didn't see what was coming. But the truth is simple. When you love someone, you make excuses for their behavior until the excuses become heavier than the love. It started so quietly that even I didn't recognize the danger. He would mock me in front of friends, calling my opinions silly or unnecessary. It always sounded like a joke, and I would force a smile because I didn't want to embarrass him or myself. People would laugh, not realizing how those small words stayed with me long after the room emptied. I told myself that marriages have hard moments, that he was stressed, that it was normal. But small things add up, and the weight doesn't go away. Over time, he stopped asking me how my day was or caring about what I needed. If I tried to talk about something important, he would change the subject or walk away. I still remember sitting at the dinner table, looking at him across from me and feeling like I was sitting with a stranger who didn't even notice I was there. He didn't yell, at least not at first. Instead, he used silence like a weapon, letting it fill the room until I felt guilty for even breathing too loudly. I tried to fix things. I tried to make myself smaller, quieter, easier to love. But nothing changed. His attention moved elsewhere, and whenever he was home, the air felt tense, like I needed permission to exist in my own house. My daughter saw more than I realized. Children always do. She watched me shrink bit by bit. She saw me avoid arguments, saw me eat alone, saw me pretend nothing was wrong. She saw me cover up tears by saying it was just allergies. Each time he dismissed me in front of her, she would look at me with worried eyes, but I kept saying everything was fine because I thought protecting her meant hiding the truth. I didn't want her to think her father could be cruel. I didn't want her tiny heart carrying the weight of adult problems. But hiding the truth only made the truth louder. His behavior grew bolder once he learned I would not confront him. He began undermining me with teachers, neighbors, and even family members. If I gave an opinion, he would contradict it, even if he agreed with me privately. He made decisions without telling me, and then claimed he had already discussed it with me. When I reminded him that we never talked about it, he accused me of forgetting things, making me question myself. That was his favorite tactic. Making me doubt my own memory, my own judgment, my own worth. And slowly, painfully, I started believing him. That is how emotional control works. It doesn't arrive loudly. It sinks in quietly, like cold water under a door, soaking everything before you even notice the floor is wet. He also started leaving the house for long stretches, claiming work had become intense. Some nights he didn't come home at all. When I asked where he had been, he would either explode or go silent, both reactions leaving me feeling guilty for even asking. My daughter would hold my hand at night and ask if everything was okay. I would force a smile and tell her not to worry, but she saw the truth in the cracks of my voice. She saw the way I jumped every time the phone rang, afraid it was him with another accusation. She saw me slowly losing pieces of myself trying to hold the family together. The last months before the divorce hearing were the hardest. He openly mocked me in front of friends, rolling his eyes at everything I said. He criticized my cooking, my clothes, even the way I walked. Nothing was safe from his judgment. He didn't just disrespect me privately. He performed it like a show, as if humiliating me made him feel bigger. My daughter saw it all. She would sit quietly, clutching her toy, watching her father push me further and further into the shadows of my own home. I saw the sadness in her eyes, the confusion, the frustration of a child who loved both parents but knew one of them was hurting the other. By the time the divorce hearing came, the damage was deep. The slow erosion had turned into a hollow space inside me where my self-worth used to live. I walked into that courtroom knowing the truth, but fearing the lies he would tell. Every insult, every sneer, every moment of disrespect had led to that single moment. I was scared, tired, and emotionally worn down. But my daughter, she had been watching, learning, and waiting. And while I felt broken, she felt brave. When the judge asked my husband to speak, the entire courtroom went silent. I could hear the echo of papers, the rustle of jackets, and the faint nervous breathing of people who already sensed that the next few minutes would change everything. I sat in my chair, hands clasped tightly, trying to steady my shaking fingers. I kept telling myself to stay calm, to breathe slowly, to remember that I was here to protect my daughter, not to win a fight. I had prepared for the usual arguments, the usual disagreements, and the usual attempts to make me look unreasonable. But I had not prepared for what came next. Because that morning, in front of the judge, the lawyers, the guards, and the small group of strangers who sat waiting for their own cases, my husband crossed a line that could never be undone. He stood up, straightened his tie, and walked to the front like a confident man who believed the world belonged to him. He handed his lawyer a folder, and the lawyer opened it slowly, as if it contained the truth. But I knew better. I had lived beside that man for years. I had seen his temper, his lies, his pride, and his ability to twist any situation so he always looked like the victim. I had seen him act one way at home and a completely different way in public. I had seen how quickly he smiled in front of others and how quickly that smile disappeared when doors closed. I had survived his moods, his sharp comments, his cold behavior, and the constant feeling that I had to tread lightly just to keep peace in my own house. And yet, even with all that, I never thought he would go as far as he did in that courtroom. He began by describing himself as a caring father and a responsible man. He listed achievements, work hours, and false contributions. He spoke like someone reading from a script, rehearsed and polished. The judge nodded politely, waiting for the real reason we were all gathered. My husband took a slow breath, looked directly at me, and then said something that felt like a knife being pushed deeper and deeper with each word. He claimed that I was unstable, unfit, irresponsible, and incapable of raising our daughter. He said it without hesitation, without guilt, and without a single thought of the little girl sitting behind me, clutching the edge of her seat. His words were cruel, heavy, and deliberately designed to hurt. His lawyer then placed papers on the judge's desk, calling them evidence. But I knew exactly what they were: twisted photographs, edited messages, and written statements taken out of context or exaggerated far beyond the truth. The photographs were of messy rooms taken during busy mornings, not evidence of neglect. The messages were fragments of long conversations cut to make me look angry or confused, when in reality I had been tired from work and stress. The statements were written by people he had persuaded, people who only heard his side, people who assumed he was the calm and logical husband simply trying to protect his daughter. It was a stack of lies, wrapped neatly in legal formatting. The courtroom felt smaller and smaller as my husband continued. His voice grew more confident, his shoulders lifted higher, and he acted as if destroying my reputation was something he deserved to do. He said I was too emotional, too forgetful, too weak. He implied that I could not keep our daughter safe. He told the judge that my daughter should live with him, not me. He said she would have a better life without me. He painted himself as the hero, the parent of structure, and the parent of stability. Every sentence dug into my chest like a weight I could not push off. I could feel my daughter behind me, still as a statue. She understood every word. I could sense her fear, her confusion, and her disbelief that her father would put me through this. My husband kept talking, building his case brick by brick, not caring that each of his bricks crushed a little part of her heart. He did not look at her once. He only looked at me and the judge, like he was presenting a performance. He did not care about truth. He cared about winning. He cared about control. When he finished, he stepped back with the same smug confidence he always carried when he believed he had outsmarted everyone. His lawyer nodded proudly. His mother, sitting behind him, sat up straighter with satisfaction. I sat silently, holding my breath, holding my strength together like thin thread. I had expected lies, but not this level of cruelty. I had expected manipulation, but not this attempt to erase me from my daughter's life. This was not just an argument. This was an attack, a direct attempt to remove me from the one thing I loved most in the world. And that moment became the turning point. It was the moment my daughter silently stood in her mind, preparing to do something I never thought she would do. It was the moment everything shifted. It was the moment my husband lost the control he thought he had, because by crossing that line, he awakened the strength in the smallest person in the room, our little girl. When my little girl stood up from that wooden bench, I felt the air around me change. Until that moment, she had sat there with her small hands folded tightly in her lap, knees pressed together, shoulders curled in the way children do when they are trying to make themselves invisible. I kept glancing toward her during the hearing, hoping she was not absorbing the hateful words her father was throwing at me, hoping she did not think any of what he said was true. I thought she was scared. I thought she was waiting for me to protect her. Instead, she was gathering a strength I didn't even realize she had. When she rose to her feet, it was slow, steady, almost careful. There was no dramatic gesture, no sudden movement. She simply stood, as if she knew exactly what she was doing. The courtroom grew quiet in a way I will never forget. Even the judge, who had been flipping through papers and tapping a pen against the desk, paused mid-movement. My husband, who had been leaning back in his chair like he owned the room, straightened slightly and looked at her with surprise. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably. It was strange to watch grown adults, loud, confident, dismissive adults, suddenly fall silent because a small child had chosen to stand. She didn't look at them. She looked at me first. Her eyes were wide, shining with tears she had been holding back for far too long, and she whispered softly, almost like she was asking permission. "Can I talk, Mommy?" Her voice shook, but her resolve did not. I felt my throat tighten. I didn't trust my voice to answer, so I nodded. She took a deep breath, one of those deep, shaky breaths that come from way down in the chest, the kind that shows a mix of fear and courage at the same time. Then she turned to the judge. Her hands trembled, but she kept them at her sides. She didn't hide behind me. She didn't hold on to my arm. She stood alone, and when she spoke, her voice, though small, filled the room more powerfully than any shouting or arguing had before. She said, "He's lying. That's not what happens at home." My husband's head snapped toward her. His eyes widened as if he could somehow stop the words from leaving her mouth. But she didn't look at him. She didn't look at anyone except the judge. The judge leaned forward slightly, giving her his full attention. That alone seemed to give her strength. She continued talking, slowly, clearly, carefully choosing her words like she had rehearsed them in her little head for weeks. She explained how he yelled at us, how he blamed everything on me, how he threw things, how I cried quietly so she wouldn't hear. Except she did hear. She heard everything. She heard every insult, every slammed door, every cruel word spoken when he thought she was asleep. She said she didn't want to live with someone who scared her. She said she felt safe with me. She said she didn't want the judge to believe lies that made her mother look bad. Every word from her felt like a weight lifting off my chest and at the same time breaking my heart. I had tried so hard to shield her. I had convinced myself that she didn't understand. I had underestimated her. Children see more than we think. Children hear more than we admit. Children remember things adults try to bury. And there she was, proving it, showing that even someone so small could speak truth in a room full of adults who had spent hours twisting it. My husband opened his mouth as if to interrupt, but the judge raised a hand to silence him. Even he didn't expect that. His lawyer looked panicked, shifting papers around as if he could undo what had just been said. His mother, who sat behind him, pressed her lips together so tightly they turned white. No one in that room expected my child to speak. No one expected her to defend me. No one expected her to expose the truth with such pure, simple honesty, something no adult in that room had managed to do so far. When she finished, she looked at me again. There was fear in her eyes, but there was also relief. Relief that she had finally said what she had been holding inside. I reached out my hand to her, and she took it. Her small fingers curled around mine, warm and shaking. I didn't need to tell her she had changed everything. I didn't need to tell her I was proud. The way she squeezed my hand told me she already knew. She had carried the truth on her tiny shoulders, and when she finally shared it, the entire room shifted. In that moment, I realized something I will never forget. Sometimes strength doesn't roar. Sometimes it doesn't shout. Sometimes it doesn't come from adults. Sometimes it rises quietly in the smallest voice in the room. And that voice has the power to break lies that grown men try to build with polished words and rehearsed speeches. She didn't just speak, she saved us both. When my little girl finished speaking in that courtroom, everything around me went still in a way I have never felt before in my entire life. It was as if the whole room stopped breathing for a moment, as if the walls themselves were listening to her tiny voice echo through the space. I looked over at my husband, the man I had once trusted more than anyone, and I watched the expression on his face change faster than a storm blowing across the sky. Just minutes earlier, he had been sitting straight, shoulders high, wearing that same confident look he always used whenever he thought he had full control of a situation. It was the same look he wore when he lied to my family, when he lied to our neighbors, when he lied to his own parents, and especially when he lied to me. He looked untouchable, as if he believed the court, the judge, the lawyers, and even the truth itself would bend to him simply because he said so. But the second my daughter began telling the judge what life in our home had really been like, that confidence cracked like thin glass under pressure. I saw panic rise in his eyes, a kind of fear I had never seen in him before. He wasn't afraid for his daughter, or for our family, or for the pain he had caused. He was afraid for himself, for his image, his reputation, his pride, and the lies he thought would carry him through the hearing without consequence. The smirk he had worn earlier slowly faded, then twisted, and then disappeared completely. His hands, which had been resting calmly on the table, tightened into fists. He kept opening and closing them, as if trying to squeeze the truth back into silence, but there was no going back. The words had already been said. The truth had already left my daughter's lips. It hung in the air like a light shining directly onto every lie he had built his case on. He looked at his lawyer, expecting some kind of rescue, some way to twist what my daughter had said, but even his lawyer looked stunned. His lawyer had built their entire argument on the belief that no one would stand up against him. They expected me to cry or stay quiet. They expected my daughter to be scared, to sit still, to pretend everything was normal the way she always had at home. But instead, she found her voice, and that one act of courage destroyed their entire performance. I watched my husband try to speak, mouth opening and closing like someone gasping for air, but no sound came out. The judge looked directly at him, eyebrows raised, waiting for an explanation, but he had nothing. Not a word, not a reason, not a single answer. His face grew red first, then pale, then red again. He shifted in his seat, rubbing his neck, licking his lips, shaking his head as if denying the truth could somehow erase it. He whispered to his lawyer, but his lawyer shook his head slowly, defeated. He tried to stand, but his voice cracked when he finally managed to speak. He said my daughter was confused, that she was making things up, but even he didn't sound convinced by his own excuses. The judge immediately cut him off and reminded him that children rarely lie about the things she described. Every person in that room could tell he wasn't defending himself. He was scrambling to hold on to whatever control he thought he still had. He turned toward me next, and for a moment I could see something in his eyes. Not regret, not sorrow, not love, but anger that his lies had failed. He looked at me like I had betrayed him, when he was the one who had betrayed both me and our daughter for years. He shook his head slowly, narrowing his eyes, as if blaming me for the truth coming out. But I didn't look away. I didn't lower my head. For the first time in years, I looked him straight in the eyes and didn't feel fear, not even a little, because I knew that the truth, once spoken, could not be buried again. Not by him, not by his lawyer, not by anyone. I watched my daughter sit back down beside me, still trembling, but holding her head high. My husband looked at both of us and realized something he had never understood before. The power he once had over us was gone. His words no longer controlled us. His temper no longer silenced us. His lies no longer carried weight. The courtroom had heard the truth from the smallest, bravest person in the room, and nothing he said could erase it. In that moment, I saw the truth settle into his expression. He had lost. Not because of me, not because of the judge, not because of the lawyer, but because the child he underestimated had told the world who he really was, and he had no escape left. When the judge finally spoke, the whole courtroom changed, almost like the air shifted. I stood there gripping the edge of the table, trying to steady myself, while my daughter squeezed my hand beneath it. She was only a child, but in that moment, she carried more honesty than every adult sitting in that room. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked directly at my husband, who suddenly seemed so small compared to the man who had walked in so sure, so confident, so ready to paint himself as a saint and me as a failure. His lawyer, who had been smiling since the first lie was spoken, no longer met anyone's eyes. My heart beat hard in my chest. I had taken so many blows in silence through the years, but this was different. Today the truth had finally found its place. The judge said my daughter's words were brave, truthful, and spoken without coaching or pressure. He noted that she had no reason to lie and every reason to stay quiet out of fear. He even said that adults often hide behind loud words and fake evidence, but children speak from a place that cannot be rehearsed. When he said that, my husband shifted uncomfortably, pulling at his collar as if the room had grown too warm for him to breathe in. I watched him avoid looking at our daughter, the same child he claimed to love more than anything, the same child he tried to use as a pawn to win control. He could not look at her because she had taken the mask off his face in front of everyone. Then came the ruling. The judge rejected every accusation my husband had made. He said there was no proof to support the claims, no witness to back them, no facts to hold them upright. He said the evidence his lawyer provided was misleading, selective, and in some cases completely irrelevant. He even warned the lawyer that using such tactics again could lead to penalties. I felt a weight lifting off me, slowly, piece by piece. My husband's face turned red, not from shame. I don't believe shame was something he ever truly felt, but from losing control, losing power, losing the version of the story he had worked so hard to build. The judge declared that full custody would remain with me. He said my home was stable, my actions consistent, and my daughter's own testimony showed she felt safe with me. He also ruled that my husband's visitation would be supervised until a full evaluation was completed. When those words hit the air, I felt my knees go weak, not because I doubted myself, but because I had spent so long fearing that the truth might never be enough. And yet, here it was. Enough to protect my daughter, enough to give her a chance at peace, enough to show him that lies don't always win. My husband tried to argue, raising his voice in frustration. The judge warned him sharply, telling him that one more outburst and he'd be held in contempt of court. For once, he fell silent. He looked around as if expecting someone to step in and defend him. His lawyer stayed quiet. His family, who had always encouraged his behavior, was nowhere to be seen. It struck me then The people who help someone lie rarely stick around when the truth arrives. After the gavel struck, the sound echoed through the room, final and strong. My daughter leaned into me, and I wrapped my arms around her, the tears coming whether I wanted them to or not. Not sad tears, not broken ones, just the release of years of quiet suffering washing out of me. I whispered that she was safe now, that she had saved both of us. She nodded like she had known it all along. As we walked out, my husband called out my name, but I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I didn't owe him anything anymore. His lies had been laid out for the world to see, and the judge had seen right through them. He was no longer the man who controlled every argument, every decision, every moment in our home. He was just another person facing the consequences he never expected. Outside the courthouse, the sun felt different, warmer, lighter. Like something in the world had opened again. My daughter held my hand and asked if we could go get ice cream. I said yes. For the first time in a long time, the answer came easily. I wasn't afraid of tomorrow anymore. Justice had found us, and we were finally free. After the divorce hearing ended and the judge ruled in my favor, I walked out of that courtroom feeling like the weight I had carried for years had finally fallen off my shoulders. But the true change did not happen in that courtroom. It happened in the days and weeks that followed when I began to understand what it meant to rebuild a life after betrayal, lies, and years of quiet suffering. The first thing I learned was that peace is not something anyone gives you. It is something you claim for yourself, especially after living under the shadow of someone else's control. My daughter and I went back to our small home, and for the first time in a long time, the air did not feel tight or heavy. She sat on the couch and played with her toys without glancing over her shoulder in fear. I moved through the rooms without waiting for a loud voice or a slamming door. Every small, quiet moment felt like freedom, and I held on to it with both hands. I spent those first days cleaning out everything that reminded me of the past. I took down old pictures, boxed away old papers, and threw out items that carried painful memories. I didn't do it out of anger. I did it so my daughter and I could start fresh without the shadow of a man who tried to break us. I also realized how easily people settle for small hurts because they think the big ones will never come. For years, I accepted little disrespect, little insults, little moments when my voice didn't matter. I told myself it was normal, that marriage meant compromise, that every couple had their problems. But the truth is simple. Real love never requires you to shrink so someone else can feel bigger. And as I reflected on what my daughter had done in court, standing up with a courage that even grown adults struggle to find, I understood that children often learn by watching. She had seen me stay quiet for too long. She had watched me let her father decide everything, my words, my choices, my life, and when she stood up and told the truth, she showed me what strength actually looked like. In the weeks that followed, I changed how I lived. I made time for myself in ways I had ignored before. I took morning walks. I sat with a cup of tea without rushing. I cooked meals that felt like comfort instead of obligation, and I paid attention to my daughter in a way that went beyond basic care. I listened to her dreams, her fears, her stories, her laughter. I wanted her to grow up knowing her voice mattered, that she never had to hide pain just to keep someone else comfortable. I wanted her to understand that truth is powerful even when it scares you, especially when it scares you. I knew I had to lead by example, so I kept every promise I made to her and to myself. I also learned that betrayal does not end your life. It redirects it. The lies my husband told in that courtroom could have broken me, but instead, they taught me to see clearly. I realized that people who lie do so because they fear the truth, while people who tell the truth stand taller with every word. And my daughter, small as she was, had stood taller that day than many adults ever have. Seeing her find her voice helped me find mine again. I became more firm, more sure, more protective of the life I was rebuilding. I stopped apologizing for things that were not my fault. I stopped tiptoeing around the idea of upsetting anyone. I stopped carrying blame that was never mine. Our home grew stronger, steadier, and quieter in the best way. I helped my daughter heal by giving her stability, routine, and love that did not change from one minute to the next. She helped me heal simply by being a reminder of why I had fought so hard. I eventually realized that surviving doesn't just mean walking away. It means learning how to live again without fear. It means accepting that people you trust might break you, but it does not mean you let them keep the pieces. And it means believing that even small footsteps forward count as progress. Now, when I look back at that day in court, I don't remember the fear anymore. I remember the moment my daughter chose truth. I remember the moment I chose strength. And I remind myself that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it comes from a child's small hand holding yours, steadying you when your own knees shake. The moral I learned, and the one I share with any woman who has ever felt trapped, silenced, or dismissed, is simple. You are stronger than the person who hurt you wants you to believe. And the moment you choose to stand up, the whole story changes. My daughter saved us both that day, not because she was fearless, but because she was honest. And honesty, even from the smallest voice, has the power to break chains you thought would never open.